Hello everyone, on behalf of CELC. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Martin, I will be the moderator, and today we also have Professor Mary Jones, the founder of CELC, and Dr. Oliver Mailleux, a CELC convener who will be in charge of the technical aspect of the event. We are very lucky to be joined by four amazing Kanyen'kéha language activists today. So we have Kanyen'kéha Brian Maracle, who founded the Ongwawana Ganjokwa Revitalization Schools at Six Nations in 1998. We also have Rohahi or Jordan Brandt, who is a teacher in the Ongwawana Immersion Program. Garakwahawi Zoe Hopkins, who is in charge of the online program at Ongwawana, and Ryan Decker, who is assistant professor in Indigenous Studies and Linguistics at the University of Toronto, and who has been involved in various revitalization projects as well. So how this will work is that we'll first have individual presentations by each speaker, about 10 to 15 minutes, and then a discussion at the end for questions. So audience members, you can't speak directly, but you can ask questions at any time using either the chat or Q&A functions, and we'll discuss all of these at the end. And I can now give the floor to Kanyen'kéha.
What's going on, Tiniutiwa Holland, Tito de Kanyen'kéha ni Waxanoda, Brian Maracle ni Waxanoda, Otsudunikiha, that no Agiranchi, Tito Daswich, Kwaki, Riconostane, Martin Renard. Neji Israel de Winston and Ngwana. Dano eto I Erina Donkwa, Neji eto Nigonda ne Lawana, ne Lausana, ne Jitso. I want to thank Martin for organizing this, for giving us an opportunity to talk about our work here. And I've been invited to talk about the beginnings and maybe how we got to this point, the starting point, and I'll do that through a PowerPoint that I put together, and all I have to do is figure out how to do that. Okay, that's the way. Our beginnings. Oswego, otherwise known as the Six Nations of the Grand River Territory, is one of 6 Mohawk territories, and sad to say that there are no first language speakers of the Oswegan dialect left here at Grand River. In the 1990s, the Mohawk language here had been withering for years. Only older people spoke it, and the language was rarely heard in the community outside of public school classrooms. And the schools did not teach children how to speak the language. Kids learned how to count. They learned the names of animals, colors, and little else. And that's because students were being taught using whole words, where one word in Kanyen'kéha is a whole sentence in English. And becoming a beginning level speaker using whole words means trying to memorize all the sentences that an English-speaking child would know. It's impossible. I didn't speak Kanyen'kéha as a boy, and my parents didn't speak the language either. In the 1990s, I started trying harder to learn Kanyen'kéha, and I took classes from 5 different teachers, including a 6-month-long full-time program. And in the end, I couldn't put a simple sentence together. And then in 1997, I visited Kanyen'kéha. He was teaching Mohawk at the University of Western Ontario. He still does. And he introduced me to what I call the root word method. He showed me how 1,500 root words can be used to create hundreds of thousands of words in Kanyen'kéha. Seeing how the root word method worked made me realize that learning through root words would enable me to think in the language so that I could say and understand things I'd never heard before. And because there were no adult immersion programs at the time, Ohnegi Yosta, my wife Audrey, and I organized one so that we could become speakers. And Ungwabwanaganjokwa was born. Ganadawako began teaching in September 1999, and I was his teacher aide. I learned enough language that year to begin teaching the following year. Ungwabwanaganjokwa has taught a full-time adult immersion program since 1999. In 2010, we lengthened the program to 2 years so that students now routinely finish with an advanced level speaking proficiency. It's an achievement that's unmatched elsewhere. In 2013, we began teaching an online program that's based on our immersion program curriculum. The root word method has spread across Revitalising, and language activists from our sister languages are using the root word curriculum to teach their languages to their people. Yungwa Huana Nirladun Haje. We are strengthening our language. Etonigawanigit Danoneto. That new. Again, I thank Jitsu for organizing this and presenting us this opportunity to talk about our work. And there are many details that are left over, which I'll leave to my colleagues to start filling in some of the blanks. I'd be happy to answer any questions after all of our presentations are over. Eto Knigo.
Nyawangoa for this really nice presentation. It's good to see the origins of the school, and I think now we can have the presentation by Rohahio.
Yo. Yo, se vatunde ka. Yanare, yo. Wat kono paraden se vakwego. Rohahio ni waksan odno. Ano kan tege wakade hiaro. Kan oswego kena gari mo mani sura danyo. Ne jinu ne keri honyane ne Ungwabwanaganjokwa. Sego se vakwego. Hello everyone. My name is Rohahio Jordan Brandt. I'm a Mohawk from Kanyen'kéha Mohawk territory. I'm currently residing in Oswego, Six Nations in Southern Ontario. And I've been residing here for a number of years now. And I'm currently in my 6th year as an instructor, and currently the lead instructor here at Ungwabwanaganjokwa Adult Language Immersion School. I'm also currently studying my Master's of Indigenous Language Revitalization at the University of Victoria. What I'm going to go through, it's a very brief presentation. We're going to keep it to 10 minutes. Over the course of this 10 minutes, I'm going to go over our program goals, what we want to achieve year after year. As well, I'm going to go into the root word method. Those linguists among you, recognize it as RWM these days. And then I'll go over our curriculum very briefly on a yearly basis, as well as our methods of assessment. And then I will finish with an in-depth explanation of our daily routine. Our program goals year after year are to create proficient speakers of Kanyen'kéha. And this occurs over 2,000 classroom hours. And this is over 2 school years. So 1,000 contact hours in the first year and another 1,000 hours in the second year. And as we can see, our proficiency, we have to define what is fluency, what is proficiency. So to do this, we look at our reverse pyramid here on the left. It's called the ACTIFIL OPI scale, the American Council on Teaching Foreign Languages. And we use this as a measuring stick for our program to define what is fluency and set our program goals. Now, on our second point here, over the course of the 2 years in the school, students become good orators, readers, and writers of the language. And I put good orators first because our emphasis is on creating speakers of the language. Fortunately, over the course of the 2 years, over 2,000 hours, they do become literate as well. They do become readers and writers of the language, which it is 2021. This is becoming increasingly important. The majority of communication these days is done over text. So literacy has become increasingly important. And our third and last point here, students not only become talented speakers, but also talented problem solvers and learners of the language. Now, this is an important point to bring up, because if we take a look at our reverse pyramid here on the left, right in the bottom of that orange section, advanced low is our program goal over the 2 years. As you can see, that gets them pretty good at the language, but it's not all the way to the top. So it's up to them to continue their fluency journey, and our program goals really go beyond what our capacity is over 2 years. And to continue to do this, they have to utilize the problem solving skills, and they have to learn how to learn the language, which is an enormous task in itself. To do this, we utilize what is called the root word method. What we have to understand about this is that Kanyen'kéha is a polysynthetic language, meaning that over 90% of the vocabulary are verbs. And 100%, I believe, 100% of our students, past and present, their first language is English. So going from English to learning a polysynthetic language is an incredibly challenging task. So what we have to do with a polysynthetic language is there are essentially as many possible words in the language as there are possible sentences in English. So if we're just going to go about it and try to learn on a word by word basis of a language that has a seemingly infinite lexicon, we're really not going to become speakers in our lifetime. So we have to use tools and foundational learning to do this. This is where the root word method really assists us. So our second point here, root word method is really a patterned, structured approach to rapid language acquisition. And our third point, before I go in depth into it more, root word method is a language learning tool, but it's not the entire toolkit. And I really want to get this point across because there's a whole lot more going on with language learning than the root word method, but it is an incredibly useful tool that we utilize. So if we take a look at these 40 words in this great big diagram I put here, in our top left, I like it, genues. That's the red prefix. Take a look at another one, and another one here, senues, you like it. You'll notice all of those red colors are indicating someone to something, such as genues, I like it, I like the dog. And we take a look at our top right in our blue section. All of these blues are indicating something to someone. Wagenues, it likes me. So the dog likes me. And at the bottom, we have purple prefixes indicating someone to someone relationships. So in the top left of the purple section, I like you, gunues. And all of these are called pronominal prefixes. You'll notice that the nues is staying exactly the same. All we're doing is swapping out the pronominal prefix. By understanding the root word, we understand, we can therefore manipulate it in many ways. It's a patterned approach leading to exponential learning. And as a demonstration here, we'll take a look at these. Nues means to like. Narunqua, to love. Yenderi, to know. We have 3 different root words. If I attach the same prefix to all of these root words and endings, kenues, me to her, I like her. Kenarunqua, I love her. Keyenderi, I know her. So by learning those base 40 words with nues, those 40 prefixes, we can now attach all of those to Narunqua, and we've instantly doubled our vocabulary. And then we attach it to Yenderi, we learn another 40 words. And we learn how to negate those right out of the gate. So if we can negate them, that doubles our vocabulary again. Then we learn how to make those a question. We've doubled our vocabulary again. Then we learn how to make it a negated question. And we've doubled our vocabulary again. So this is what we mean by exponential learning. Now our curriculum we have a very, very structured plan of foundational learning. Now, on the left here is our year 1 curriculum over 1,000 years. For the sake of time, I didn't include all the units. And on the right-hand side is the year 2 curriculum. Now, I bring this up because this is a unit by unit foundational based approach. We cannot move on from one unit to the next without fully understanding all the intricacies and all the vocabulary within any given unit. So if we take a look at year 1, basic verb conjugation, sentence structure. Unit 2 is kinship terms. These are all different patterns that we learn. And in year 2, you'll notice that all of these are simply suffixes at the end. We're building upon all the foundations that we learned in first year to continue to become more advanced speakers. Now, in order to foster understanding and ensure students understand on a unit-to-unit basis before we move on to each unit, we have different forms of assessment. At Kanyen'kéha, we use a hybrid approach of both formative and summative assessment. On a daily basis, we use a formative assessment, both spoken and written, and as instructors, we utilize this to really see where the students are at, what we need to work on. And I'll get into more of that in a minute. And on a monthly basis, per each of those units, there's a summative assessment that tests the students' understanding, ability to understand vocabulary, and ability to generate vocabulary within any given unit before we can move on to the next one. And at year end, we have a summative assessment, which is known as an Actifil Oral Proficiency Interview, or an OPI. Many of you have probably seen the YouTube video, especially of Ryan DeCare, the famous one, that this is, they're on YouTube, and this is what we use as our year-end exam per se, to assess a student's proficiency in speaking the language. To go into this more, for the sake of time, I won't be able to go in depth into this, but if anyone wants to discuss this afterwards, there will be a question period at the end for a unit per unit's assessment. I'm going to end this presentation talking about our daily routine. Now, our daily routine, we go from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., 5 days a week. If anyone would like to discuss how we've kind of changed to adjust to the Zoom platform, I'd be more than happy to discuss that later on. This is our usual in-class routine that we do when we're able to join in class. So at 9 a.m. we start, and our activity is an opening and a story routine, whereas every student stands up one by one, talks about how they're feeling, what they did the night before, how things are going, and sit back down, and the next student stands up. And we use this as a formative assessment to not only see how the student is progressing, but also to see what kind of state and condition they're in, and how hard we can really proceed with the day, how we can go about the day. And this also helps us formulate our lesson plan on the fly. At 9:30, we get into our first lesson. And as you can see, the goal of that activity is an introduction to the daily lesson. 10:15, we take our first break. At 10:30, we pick up on that initial lesson, and then we start to perform drills as well. Those of you that want to discuss that later, absolutely write that down, and I'll be more than happy to discuss it afterwards, which kind of drills we use. And this is really targeted to foster understanding of the material within the curriculum. 12 o'clock, we take a lunch. 12:30, we continue with our lessons. 1:45, we take another break. And then 2 to 3, we end the day with drills. And we also informally start the next day's lesson. That's, again, to foster understanding of target material, but also kind of give them a hint of what's going to happen, so it's not brand new to them the next day. And I'm going to end on here with another 30. I have another 30 seconds here. But you'll notice that I've highlighted the opening and story routine, the break, the lunch, and the other break. Now, the goal of all of these is to generate informal speaking time. And this is incredibly important to the development of a speaker. In class, we teach them what they have to learn, but we don't necessarily teach them what they want to learn. This gives them an opportunity to use what they know to hear new words, and to ask questions about words that are outside of the curriculum. And the working in conjunction with this formal instruction and this informal speaking time is how we create speakers of the language. That's the end. Tok niigo. Niama sewakwego.
Yeah, on Goa, it was really interesting to find out about all these specific details. I had no idea about how the assessment worked, for example. It was really interesting. And next we have Mohawk.
Sego Sewagwego, Gerda Kohawi ni Waxanoda, that no Zoe Hopkins, Niongats ne Oturunigeha, Keri Honyanis, Gerda Warage, that no Quisaronti, I almost Gia Aguego Yanade, Jinuti, Keri Honyanis, Gerda Warage, and one Dorde, that no, yeah. Aguego de Ginderdi of Niot, Ekeri Hanyo, Gurnawarage, Nekti Gadatinata. Hi everyone, my name is Garakwahawi. Some of you may know me from the online course. I see some of my students in here, so it's nice to see your names on the participant list. My name is Zoe Hopkins in English. I'm a graduate of the Ongwana Gunchokwa immersion program, and full disclosure, Owanadaka is my dad, and I live here in Six Nations next door. So we have a lovely little family unit here, and I have been teaching online for I think 8 years. I graduated and then started making online videos to use as resources and entertainment, because there's such a dearth of material, whether it's printed or video or musical or whatnot. If we need it to teach with or need it to entertain with, we have to make it first because it doesn't exist already. So that is one of my biggest challenges in trying to adapt this material that we use in the immersion program for an online setting, is that I have to also create the material and learn how to create it. Luckily I come to this position with some of those skills already, as I'm a filmmaker. In the rest of my life, I work part-time at Ongwana, and so in a multitude of part-time positions forming probably 6 different people's jobs, I teach and I make films and I write and I try to do all the things that make me happy, and this is one of the things that I do. I want to share with you some of the things that I make and some of the things that I've come up against in trying to adapt the material for an online setting. The goal has been to try to take the first year textbook from the immersion setting and try to adapt it to the online world by adding audio and video and figuring out how to parse it out. It's not a document that you can use by yourself. You need a bit of a guide, and I try to be a guide, but our course is taught for a student to sort of try to go through it, move through it by themselves. There's nothing, there's no live component to any of the online courses. So I'll just share this with you. And I can't see I can't see the part of the screen that lets me, sorry. Here we go. Okay. Sorry. I'm having a bit of a technical problem here. Okay. So the goal, as I said, is trying to take the immersion material and share it online. And I do that by using a learning management system called Schoology or Schoology. And we pay for that. It's a few $1,000s US every year. Currently, I have 71 students, and there's 6 courses: Introduction to Kanyen'kéha, and then units 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 is under construction. So currently, I'm building Unit 5, and with the goal to build all 12 units of the first year immersion material. And each unit in the textbook is offered as a separate course. So if you pass one unit, you can move on to the next unit. I build all the material and teach it and administer the courses myself, and we're hoping to add more staff in this coming school year. And just to give you a little idea of what it looks like online, Schoology can be web-based, or if you're using a mobile device, there's an app for your phone or your iPad and whatnot. And so these are all the courses that I'm currently teaching. Intro, Unit 1, and is divided into 2 parts, and the Unit 2 all the way up into Unit 5 is not completely built yet, but and our units, I break them up into lessons and try to figure out what is a good way to break up the material. And each lesson generally comes with a video, and I have to use English in the course, unlike in the immersion course, which is where there's no English used to teach. But because I'm not live with the students, I use English to teach the terms. And this is showing a tool that I'll get into. But this is kind of how it looks. There'll be a textbook page, and I've added in some interactive elements that explain things, and you can also hear these words. So it's been a trip to try to add all of these elements onto each textbook page. The other thing that I started with was making films, little short videos. Some were sort of meant to be teaching tools and things that I found difficult to learn or grasp while I was taking an immersion program, but also some that were just for entertainment. And you can find our YouTube channel if you Google Mohawk Star Wars, and that's a sort of easy way to find our YouTube channel. And here's I won't show you very much of this.
Nyatnika Howichi Agiagos, Yonkori Spaghetti Staha, Dosagar Hogor Yahaze, Yoter Ne, Okwari Expuni Nagare, Donagunex Ne Nugunazas.
So that was just a funny video we made for entertainment purposes on our YouTube channel. And we also have this interactive textbook that I've built for the earlier units on the course, using a web-based program called ThingLink, which allows you to upload links and media and images and audio to JPEGs. So what happens is that I've turned like each page of the textbook into a separate image, and then applied audio links and whatnot. Some of them have videos, some of them have images, but each phrase and each word has an individual audio link. So you can see how laborious that has been to try to do that for every page. So I've been trying to move away from doing that amount of work and sort of moving into different methods. One of them is the creation of this online tool, which is to give students an opportunity to practice conjugating verbs with some instant feedback. So a student can work on a verb like how Rohahio was explaining, it likes me. So the prefix for it likes me is wage, and you get the instant feedback. When this field turns green, you know that you were right. but as soon as you type an incorrect character, it'll turn red. And it'll stay white until you've completed the correct answer. So then you can type in the word and practice conjugating. And so this tool has all the verbs from every unit in it, so you can practice conjugating. And that's been useful. I would love for one day to have audio as well, but that's not yet been something we can develop. And that information is just held all in these giant spreadsheets that have all of the data for that tool inside of them. And I owe a big thanks to Martin for helping me build that. And he actually compiled that data for me. So I'm incredibly grateful for that. Some of the challenges that I've run into in building some of the resources that we have are just simple things like, geez, it would be nice to be able to offer some of our videos with subtitles. So that's just a little video. But some of the challenges is that it's just hard to be able to want to offer things like subtitles on all of the videos, because those have to be manually created and manually applied. And it's just one more thing that's quite tedious. Another challenge with the online course is that there's a limited or no engagement with the students. So I've had over 1,000 people go through these courses now, and I've not seen many of them in real life. Another issue is just device compatibility. I always have to look for resources and technical things that I use that will work across every device and be free and be easy to use. But despite all of the challenges, we have more students pass than not. We have over 53% success across all the online courses, which far exceeds the success of other online courses, because attrition in an online course is far greater than an in-person class. So I'm quite happy that students manage to get over the challenges of sort of learning in a vacuum and having to learn how to use all of the technology involved. For some students, that's a great hurdle. Learning how to use multiple programs like Quizlet for our flashcards, and the amount of time it takes to do a test and whatnot. The goal of the program, I would love to see, I would love to be able to break the program up into 2 years and have it just go from September until May, do the first half, and then a second year doing the second half. And that'll be quite some time yet for me to develop that. And I'm hoping to get some help this year. And another lovely addition would be to have more apps and games and videos and more staffing to be able to offer human engagement, and more time to share with students on Zoom in a live setting. That's where students get the most satisfaction out of, is being able to talk with one another. And some of the students have been able to reach out to one another and form groups and be able to engage and practice, with one another. And that's the problem with offering this online course in a bit of a vacuum. Honestly, it's not perfect, but it is wonderful to be able to offer this anything to students who are far flung, and I'm quite happy that people who are not Ongwehongwe are even able to access our course, people who are interested in our language. I'm a firm believer that the more we hear our language, the more we get to share our language, the more alive it becomes. And so speakers from our various Mohawk communities across Turtle Island and people who are interested in our island, in our language, I'm happy to be able to offer this at all, and it's nice to see people succeeding and doing things. I had one student who went on to who was able to do a small speech at her mother's graveside, in the language, and that was really lovely, to know that she was able to connect that way. Mark Miller, who's a member of Parliament and the Minister of Indigenous Affairs here in Canada, has made several speeches in Parliament in our language, and that's been very amazing to see, make these historical moments happen. And he's a student online, but works very hard outside of what we offer to learn and gain more language. So it's just been really nice to see all the little successes that go well beyond what we can offer. So nyawa wat wanu don't say what go.
Yeah, it was, and I must say, as a student in the online program myself, I'm really grateful. That's the way I can learn the language, and it's really cool. Thank you. And I think now we have our last presentation by Ryan.
So good morning. Greetings, everybody. My name is Ryan. I just said thank you to Martin for inviting me here today. And it's a real joy for me to be a part of this panel. And thank you all from, I think there's more people from here than there are from the United Kingdom. So that's great to see. And most of you listening, there's many of you I know. So it just makes me happy that you took the time out of your day to be here. So without further ado, I'll start my presentation. I'll just share my screen. So thank you everybody for being here. As I said, and if you notice, the three last small presentations, and they're very specific and they're important. With Brian talking about the structure of Ungwa and how it started, reasons for it, and Rohahio talking about exactly what happens in the classroom every day for adults in the classroom at Ungwa and Kajoko, and then Garakuhawi talking about her outreach and teaching work online to people who can't necessarily take adult immersion. And I want to take this 10 minutes, which is what Martin's given me today, to talk to you about why all that's important and to kind of bring us a little bit further out and look at, the bigger picture as to how we've gotten to here, to where we are today as Kanyen'kéha, and trying to revitalize and re-normalize our language within our communities, and how we've come to the point in realizing that adults play a much bigger role than we originally thought, when there was a large focus on children originally. So here we go. Thank you. So many of you know who I am, and there's many of you who don't. So I'll just give you a brief introduction to who I am. And I come from this one small Mohawk community. It's the smallest of all of them in Ontario. It's called Wahta. I was born and raised there. And I moved away to Oswego, to Brian's program that he's talked about in many years ago, to Ungwa and Kajoko, where I've also spent a lot of time teaching and developing curriculum and working to conduct research in order to better the program. But I've also spent a lot of time in Kahnawake, and that is just outside of Montreal, where it is really a prime area for language revitalization, and they're doing such amazing work there. And one of the leading communities, not just in Canada, but throughout the entire world, for Indigenous language revitalization. So spent a lot of time there. And I'm also, as he mentioned, a prof at the University of Toronto. So I'm a language learner, teacher, and doing my best to contribute and take on the responsibility to help make our language stronger. So considering Indigenous language revitalization and focusing it on Mohawk or Kanyen'kéha, I want you to answer to yourself, whether you're Kanyen'kéha or not, and think about this to how it fits within other Indigenous language revitalization strategies, to ask yourself, why is adult acquisition so important? In the Kanyen'kéha example, one way to start and realize that is to look at the numbers, vitality. A good friend of ours, Jeremy Green, put this chart together. And you'll notice these are a chart with all of our communities. And you can see that there's few families throughout all of our communities where intergenerational transmission has never been broken. Right? These are families that continue to pass it on. And most communities and most people, we realize that intergenerational transmission stopped quite a while ago with usually our grandparents, for people who are my age. So people who are in their 80s now were the last generation. primarily who spoke it as a primary language at least some point in their life. And when we look at the reestablishment of intergenerational transmission, we can look to the number of first language speaking children who are raised by second language speaking parents. And when we look at communities that have high numbers, namely Kanyen'kéha is doing quite well, relatively speaking, and Six Nations as well. And I would ask, well, why do these two communities have such high numbers? And I would suggest it's because they have an established adult immersion program or mechanisms within the community, within their plan, if they have it, to revitalize their language. They have a mechanism to focus on developing oral proficiency amongst adults. And why is that so important? Well, we can also look at this EGIDS, which comes from Joshua Fishman, who originally developed it as a graded intergenerational disruption scale. We can kind of assess, where is Kanyen'kéha at? How is the language doing? And for most of our communities, because each one of the reserves or reservation communities, which is basically a community archipelago, they're all within this area. You know, maybe some communities are threatened, others might be moribund, and there's a couple that are nearly extinct, such as in my own community, or Kanyen'kéha, or even Six Nations as well. So where do we want to get? And that's an important question to ask, or where have we wanted to get? And generally it's here, 6A, vigorous, and which is just passing the language on to a new generation, and it's used between peer groups. And well, we've realized that that's a pretty hard thing to do, not impossible. So considering that, what should we be concerned about? And to think about, throughout Canada, the United States, many Indigenous populations around the world, this is often what the case is for them. Of course, it's not all of them, but most of them, the last remaining speakers who are first language speakers, who had a peer group of speakers, are in their 70s, and their intergenerational transmission has been broken. So think about that, and then think about what Fishman said. And he said that mother tongues are self-sustaining, and a new generation does not wait until it goes to school to get its mother tongue. It usually gets its mother tongue in the community, in the neighborhood, among loved ones, the ones shaping the identity of the child. Well, who are the ones shaping the identity of the child? School programs can do more harm than good insofar as they shift the responsibility for transmitting the language in the home to the school, at best a poor alternative. The reason why I bring these up is because we've been teaching Kanyen'kéha immersion and had strategies for its revitalization since the late 70s. And when we look at our, how many speakers have been created since then, or if intergenerational transmission has been mended highly, and it often really hasn't. Even though our beginning immersion schools for children, elementary, were often taught by first language speakers. So there was an immersion environment in the school. So you have to ask yourself, well, what was happening? And the answer appears to be that it often wasn't pressed to become a language of the home, right? To put the burden on the teachers to make our children fluent, and then one day the children will do something about it. And I don't think it was direct in that thought, but it's what often people thought. And it was almost inspired by French immersion in Canada, where people send their children away to school to develop proficiency in French, almost as a tool belt to gain greater access to the economy, to have more secure jobs, those kind of things. We realized that didn't really work so well for us. And one of the reasons why is because their parents didn't create a language immersion environment within the home. Led later for second language speakers teaching children in elementary schools like today, with often too limited proficiency in their oral capacity to maintain immersion environments in the school now. So you often have a lack of proficiency amongst adults. So if you think that children are the future, which I certainly do, in order for them to be the future, when the language is concerned, you have to focus on the ones shaping the child, and that's the parents. And we, with adult immersion, are trying to do that. It's because we're concerned with speaking at high levels and beyond symbolic function, the ability to just give a speech. We're focused on intergenerational transmission. And we haven't been really up to recently, for the most part, because if you're speaking at high levels, in between peer groups, beyond symbolic function throughout the community as many places as possible, you're more likely to maintain and strengthen intergenerational transmission. And in order to achieve this, we really have to overcome key challenges. And you might look at them as challenges, but I look at them as necessities. And the first one is devoting sufficient time to the language. This is something that's often never been thought about in the development of oral proficiency and intergenerational transmission, right? Acquisition through use in a cultural context, and I don't just mean cultural context in the sense of being traditional or how it used to be. What is the cultural context? What's the, making it relevant to students today in their modern day lives? And then cultivating a community of users or assimilating a community of users into a community of users. So devoting sufficient time to the language, what do we really mean by that? Well, programs often minimally affect proficiency, whether they're night classes or what have you. It maybe progresses to one small point and then kind of stops, or just kind of goes over and over again, and proficiency is rarely targeted. And the amount of time required has often been overwhelming for program developers, right? It means, as Jordan, you mentioned, he talked about 1,000 hours a year. Think about what that means for the development of a program. That's a lot to commit financially, but also when your time, among other things. And that goals are rarely aligned with the length of time to achieve those goals. So programs have often been developed where they hope to get students to become speakers, however you define that, with just, a half a year or, a few months, and then they wonder why they have failed. And then one reason why they failed in that way is they're often basing it on teaching other Indo-European languages. And it suggests that we need to take different approaches for teaching Iroquoian languages when our first language is English. And acquisitions through a cultural context. It's, what I mean is that even highly resourced programs like those at universities to teach German or French or what have you, they often struggle with developing proficiency amongst their students. And that the way they get around that is they usually send students, on travel abroad to Europe or maybe even to Quebec for French to fill in those gaps. And this doesn't really work for us because we don't really have communities where the language is completely living to send our students away to. So we have to make it happen. And what do I mean by cultivating or assimilating a community of language users? Well, we know now that teaching about language revitalization or providing even linguistic skills or teaching language even to a high proficiency level does not result in intergenerational transmission. You create one speaker, that does not necessarily mean that they're going to speak it within a community. They could become the best speaker in the world, but if they stay at home and don't do anything with it, it's not going to be the biggest support. So to seriously affect revitalization, programs really need to address that they're creating community, cultivating that in one or more communities. And if they're developing the high proficiency among students, but also their parents and also the administrators of a school or program teachers, they can then help to assimilate others within the community to become speakers of the language. So if you intensify your daily use of the language in many domains in your community, and it expands to different networks, it helps to assimilate them into Mohawk language, but also to protect them from assimilation to the dominant language, which would be English or French in our case. So we're trying to address these challenges, which I would really, like I said, I'd say they're necessities. They're not really challenges with adult immersion. And by challenges, people might look at them that way because we've tried to get around them with an app here, a quick solve here, but we have to really realize that, there's no getting around those three necessities. And adult immersion has become this thing where we think is helping to address it. Because even if you look at this, and this might be of interest to some of you, the World Indigenous Nations Higher Education Consortium, they developed these 5 ways that higher education institutions, you could also say just adult programs or education for adults, could provide training in Indigenous languages. Here's the goals that they could do or focus on. Revitalize and maintain use as a marker for outsiders, revitalize and maintain internal ritual use, or revitalize, maintain home and community use. And I'm going to skip these last 2. But most programs have always focused on this, whether they knew it or not, right? To really just develop a small capacity amongst their students, and usually as a marker of their identity, almost like an emblem, to say that, yeah, I know a bit of the language. Most programs for Indigenous languages, whether they be in Indigenous communities or not, have never jumped to number 3, which is to really focus on revitalizing use in the community and in the home. So adult immersion to Kanyen'kéha people here right now, or people outside, regardless of where you're from, you have to realize that adult immersion has really become a big thing because of Mohawks. When you look around the world, it hasn't really been done too much at all. It started in Wata, 96. As Brian mentioned, they started that Ongowanagajokwa later, just after that. And then Radiwanahniirats began their program, I think it was 2001. Then Kanyen'kéha was Sadiwanagaratats. There was one in Buffalo developed at the Native Friendship Center. Then another adult immersion now in Ganasatake, as well as I forgot to mention one in Akwesasne. So we have adult immersion programs now, or used to exist, in almost all of our communities. And that should say something, that we're realizing that that is having a large positive impact. And just a recap of what Brian and Rohahio mentioned earlier, we're realizing the reason why this seems to be more effective is that immersion starts in day one, and that we're requiring students to almost be on this desert or deserted island, where in order to get their necessities to live, they have to engage in doing their best to learn this language, right? Full time, 2 years. And it's often taught by second language learners. That's an interesting thing to consider. Structurally based most of the time, every curriculum is slightly different, but usually it's focusing on the structure of Mohawk, looking at what are simple areas to learn in the language and developing complexity at the time. And methods, as Rohahio didn't talk completely about it, but methods generally are focused on how do you create simple and compelling and interesting and relevant language use to students, you know, kind of inspired by Stephen Krashen's C+1 comprehensible input, and focused on, you know, giving the students the capacity to create with language. And then a targeted demographic, right? You're focusing on young adults and parents to be, so that they'll have the capacity to create immersion environments or medium, you know, language medium environments in their home and throughout. So if you go back to these learning challenges, and I'm sorry, Martin, if I'm a few minutes over my time, I'm just about to finish. If we go back to this, I almost want to use this as a report card and to see, okay, if these are our major challenges or necessities for ensuring that we revitalize the language, if we define it by increasing the amount of speakers in a community of speakers, but also resulting in the intergenerational transmission of the language, you know, how well is Mohawk, or how well is adult immersion helping with this? When we look at these three challenges, and are we devoting sufficient time to the language? I'd say yes, for the most part. Rohahio mentioned it's still not quite enough, because you need to know, with an oral proficiency interview, or the American Council on Teaching Foreign Languages is what we use. You know, where do we want to get, right? And as he mentioned, we're trying to get to this advanced area, right, which is basically students can almost talk about everything they need, you know, for the most part. And that's kind of what our goal is. We've kind of realized that, yeah, that's almost to the level that they need to be in order to give them the confidence to create immersion environments when they're done, right? Now, you look at that, after year 2, it's our goal to get to advanced low, year 3, advanced mid, high, maybe high with year 4. We only have 2 years currently, right? Now compare that to other languages. The U.S. Foreign Service Institute has done a lot of research on how long it takes to learn second languages or foreign languages if English is your first language. And they've come up with these numbers. And I love this because it shows us why sometimes we get down on ourselves when we don't match how long it takes to learn our language with, you know, how much effort you have to put into that, right? So, you know, we'll often compare ourselves to Spanish, you know, if it takes, or French, if it takes you 600 hours to learn French, and it doesn't take us 600 hours to learn Mohawk, you know, we kind of start to get down on ourselves. So we need to stop comparing ourselves to how long it takes to learn cognate languages like French and Spanish, and then compare ourselves more with how long it takes to learn languages that are much more different structurally, but also culturally, and also with the orthography as well, right? We notice that it's likely, because of those reasons, that Mohawk's going to take 2,200 hours at least to become an advanced speaker, and likely more because we have lack of resources, you know, and access to the language, which Chinese, Japanese, Arabic, and other languages don't, right? So how many hours? As you mentioned, 2,000. We probably need more, right? Probably need way more than that. Compare that to general adult courses. you know, take a course at a university like some that I teach, and it's going to really take, you know, you're going to have to get 2 or 3 undergrads to get that amount of time if you really want to become a speaker. So if you think about that, our students are getting to a decent level, but they're not really getting it to a high enough level that we need for them to be confident. So I give us an X as well. But we're doing well at an acquisition through use in a cultural context, meaning that if students just went away to somewhere that wasn't a Mohawk community and learned the language, it wouldn't be within a relevant community for them. And then cultivating a community of users. We're doing pretty good at that, where we're focusing on our students to develop a community where that becomes their community. And they start to define themselves through use of the language, right? That's their number one identifying marker, is that, you know, it's not just I'm Kanyen'kéha or Mohawk, it's that I'm a Mohawk speaker and I want to be with other Mohawk speakers. That language use is your number one identifying feature, right? And so we're doing a pretty good job at that, but we're also not doing a great job at that. And that's maybe a limitation of adult immersion, that maybe that's not our responsibility, and that's the responsibility of other community organizations. But it's certainly something we need to work on, because like I said at the beginning, we need to focus on creation of speakers. However, if they're not speaking within a community where they have a sense of trust and social cohesion and respect amongst their peers, in which they want to continue to cultivate that community, it's going to be challenging or create challenges for intergenerational transmission restoration. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you all for listening today. Again, Martin, my apologies for going over a few minutes.
No problem. We're actually not late, so it's fine. Nyangoa, it's great to see this big picture to put everything in context. And I think it gives us about half an hour and more if people want to stick around for questions. So now is the time to ask questions using either the Q&A or chat function. It's up to you, really.
If nobody wants to ask a question, huh?
Maybe what people are thinking about potential questions, I actually have one that I like to ask, is about specifically, you know, how I was wondering, you know, how effective is it to create new first language speakers through second language speaking parents? Is it as effective as learning from first language speaking parents? Or are there like differences in how do you tackle these challenges, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I could take a stab at that. And I first say that I'm naive in answering that. There's some people here actually listening to us that would know better because they've done it, right? And generally you notice it's not easy, right? To raise first language speaking children as a second language learner. Because for the reason that I've said is that there's a lack of community amongst other second language learners doing the same thing. So you start to develop a sense of ostracization from your community, right? You start to feel alone. But then also the same thing for your children, right? Is that they start to feel once they grow up that it's challenging for them to feel as if it's relevant to them, right? So this idea that, you know, if just one family is doing it, it's much harder than if many families are doing it, right? And creating that community around it, right? And of course, there's the linguistic challenges associated with your proficiency as a second language speaker, that it's going to be more challenging, right? Because it's very hard to turn off your primary language in your mind, right? And we've noticed that's one of the biggest gaps amongst our graduates, is that they can speak about almost all the things that they want to, but when it comes down to language use where they need to speak immediately, so that might convey their emotions, right? Or where they say have to reprimand their children, or they might have to teach their kids a lesson, or, you know, those kind of things, it becomes very, very challenging to speak in your second language, right? So you notice those challenges just from speaking with others who are doing a really good job at that. Yeah. I hope I answered some of your questions.
Yeah, that makes sense. No. We have a question from Brenda. How do you get over the lack of confidence when trying to learn as an adult? I think that's really interesting to talk about the the motivations and the confidence as an L2 learner?
I have just one comment about that was it's just what I think I see. It sometimes presents as shyness, in a public setting. People are shy to share or speak or talk or have varying levels of social anxiety, and that's difficult, and that's maybe separate than having confidence in your speaking ability. But I think not having to struggle with social anxiety myself. I used to struggle with shyness, and I just decided one day to stop, and just like, I think on our first day of immersion class, like Awanadeka presented this as an opportunity to adopt a new personality, like this is going to be your Kanyen'kéha classroom personality, put yourself out there and don't be afraid. And there's not really, maybe there's strategies around forming a fearless way of speaking, but I think that if you when I decided to stop being shy and stuff, it was because I recognized that I was missing opportunities, and so if you're allowing the fear to take the front stage, then you're not getting an opportunity to be front stage and like have an opportunity to talk with people in practice. And accepting the fact that like you're not sitting there laughing at other people for making mistakes, you're not judging other people for doing their best to learn. So if you can sort of flip it on yourself and recognize nobody's laughing at me right now, I'm trying my best to speak my language and I'm going to make a mistake, and people are looking at me as somebody trying to learn the language. And so just being gentle with yourself, I think is good, and recognizing that you're the one that's judging yourself and other people aren't.
Yeah. I think what I'll do is try to answer one question from the chat and then one from the Q&A function, so we can get both. So we have a question from René Lemieux. Do you know if other indigenous communities other than Kanyen'kéha use the root word method to teach their language? Is it possible to use it for other languages? I'm thinking about Wendat, for instance, and that's Huron, right? If I'm not mistaken.
The print is, I haven't studied linguistics, but I understand that the languages of North America are all polysynthetic, meaning that the principles of learning the language as an adult are the same, in that you have to start with the root words that compose the language and use that as the basis for understanding it, to be able to develop the ability to think in the language and assemble your thoughts into coherent words. And so I think the principles apply to all of the languages across Turtle Island.
I could also just chime in there. If you look at a little bit of this second language acquisition literature, there's some who believe strongly that it doesn't matter really what the structure is of your language that you're trying to acquire as a second language. Whereas from our perspective at Ngo'wana is that we're saying that one shouldn't approach learning Mohawk if English is your first language. One shouldn't approach learning that language the same way that you would approach learning another Indo-European language. You need to consider the unique structure of Kanyen'kéha as a way to give you, is to find a more expedient way to learn a language, right? And what Rohio mentioned earlier was that basically, why learn 1,000 words when you could learn 10 rules that are going to give you the capacity to create those 1,000 words? That creates its own challenges because you might start saying things that you wouldn't say, but it's still more efficient, right? And that all indigenous languages could take this approach as well, whether you want to call it a root word method or to look at the morphemes and understand the morphophonological change of the language and be like, yeah, let's not approach these as whole words, right? And actually look at them at their individual pieces. giving students the capacity to create with language. And I think that would be amazingly helpful to all Indigenous languages across North America, regardless if they're polysynthetic or not. That's just my opinion on that.
Oh, no. We have two questions from Dominique. I think I can answer the second one straight away. I don't know what my PhD topic will be yet. I'm working on my master's thesis right now, so one thing at a time. And first question, how do you manage beginners classes without using English? Very interesting question.
So that's in an immersion setting. There's many different kinds of classes. What we do is, without using English in a beginner's class, it really becomes a kind of sink or swim situation. In the past, before I even took the program, for a while it was sink or swim. All in Kanyen'kéha as soon as they walked in the door. We've kind of maybe gotten softer in our old age, but there is a little bit of English at the beginning for sure. To say, how we kind of outline the program expectations and how we're going to approach it. We use a lot of implicit instruction, and a lot of the drills really to go over them in detail would take a lot of time. But a demonstration, is it's really a combination of implicit instruction and implicit corrective feedback. So demonstrating to students and really having them parrot things first. We always say there's three areas you have to, as a language learner, you have to develop. You have to train your ears to hear it, your mind to understand it, and your mouth to say it. And if you're not engaging one of those three things during your language process, you're not going to become a speaker. So really, right out of the gate, we kind of eliminate that. You don't have to think about it. I always say, hey, some word that's really hard, for a beginner speaker, and then we demonstrate it to someone who's good in the class or someone who's already has some language background, and that's why a TA is incredibly important. So I'll say, in which Ryan would respond with, that's right. Yo, and I might repeat that 5 times. He was running until they kind of learn in context. Okay, that's what I have to say. So it gets them kind of speaking before they understand what they're saying. But over time, over a long period of time, they have to be patient with themselves as well. That kind of develops naturally into a complete immersion environment. I hope it was helpful.
Yeah, we have another question from Jed, who says, I think one of the hardest things about community learning programs is that people pop in and out all the time. The teacher has a very hard job of trying to provide relevant material to the advanced students while not scaring off the beginners. That's one reason I'm enthusiastic about online courses with the opportunity to be self-paced. But there are obvious drawbacks to online too. Do you have any thoughts about giving people the best of both, the community of a class cohort and the opportunity to work at their own pace?
In the online setting, it's easy for students to work at their own pace. I can't imagine how I would do that in a live setting. I can't imagine how that would be possible for one student to be light years ahead of people who are still in the shallow end of things. But and having students work at their own pace in the online setting presents some challenges in that I am one person, and if I had a staff of multiple people to mark things as they come in, that would be great. But I have to sort of stay where I'm at, where cohorts are at, and currently I'm looking at streamlining things so that we have one canoe, because right now there's too many. I have a a fleet of boats, and some people are in little dinghies off by themselves way out in the ocean, and like I can't keep track anymore. So I'm hoping to be able to get everybody in one boat and have us like finish one journey together at the end of the year, because I hope to not do my job forever, and it's currently not possible for me to hand it over to anyone else because it's a little bit too crazy right now. I wouldn't want to give somebody the mess that I have to manage. It's all in my head, but challenging for someone else to take on.
A question from Ian. Now that you have demonstrated the high degree of success in teaching learning through adult immersion, I'd like to come back to something which Ryan mentioned. Has there been recognition by Ngwehongwe governments for a need to develop a local policy to require language for jobs, domains, etc.?
Ryan, easy, Sariwa.
I don't want to Declan's going to get his mic on. It depends on how, Ian, we define Ngwehongwe governments first. But yes, there's been a few different examples of policy. One of the most famous actually is the Kahnawake language law. I forget what the year that was, so somebody could maybe write that in the chat who would know. And basically making it mandatory to have access to use of the language in community domains if it's needed. The question would be whether or not that has been effective, and I think most would agree that that kind of top-down approach to policy didn't seem to work. It hasn't really worked because there hasn't been a structural foundation of guaranteed long-term funding that are going to create a sustained creation of second language learners for the community, right? So it's often been kind of the cart before the horse type thing. And we're only seeing now with students who are graduating that they are going on to create new environments and expanding use in the community, right? I think there's another question related to this about, what do students do after? And there are a good chunk of students who stop speaking altogether. They get busy with life, have to pay the bills and all these kind of other things that they're challenged with. There's others who go on to do, make it a mandatory thing for their life. And that's one of the big gaps that we have, is that we've noticed with adult immersion is that it's great. We're creating some high proficiency, but we need better mechanisms for them to maintain that community of speakers later on. So that's all I'm familiar with, Ian, with any kind of, recognition by governments. There's some funding here and there, but nothing I've ever seen written.
Yeah. Question from Marianne. Here in Jersey, we are in very much the same situation with a very low number of native speakers in their 80s. We have a number of middle-aged adults interested, but have difficulty infusing young adults and gaining public support for learning. Did you have similar challenges to start with?
I'll speak to that. In that, yeah, in the early days, 1999 and the first years of the 2000s, our average student was a middle-aged grandmother, and nowadays it is somebody that's it is still primarily a woman, but they're 20 to 25 years old. So that's our average student nowadays. So maybe because we've gone through all of the middle-aged grandmothers as students, and now it is caught on within their families, and we have multiple family members that have taken the program, and the word spreads nowadays through Facebook and social media of people who see people using the language, young people using the language, and it is spread so that there are 90% of our applicants are people under 30 years old.
Question from Gayirdi. Does the current online program now have 4 levels classes that can be taken one at a time?
Yeah, there's 5, and they're in succession. So I suppose if you're at a high level, you could take them all at once, but nobody's doing that. They're doing them one at a time. So yeah, there's 5 with a 6th being built right now.
Question by Jimena. I would like to know the kind of in-class activities you use to apply the grammatical and morphological notions learned in the classroom. I guess you use a communicative approach or a task-based approach. Do you have any examples?
Yeah, before that was the in-class instruction follows the curriculum. We say, what's more important, a good program or a good instructor? And we always say, well, a good program's important. That way you can put anyone in there and the program will still work. So what we really focus on year to year is changing the textbook, changing our curriculum, and updating it and trying out new things year after year to keep evolving, I guess. And what's really important is that the instructors are the ones who are changing the curriculum. The ones who are going to be teaching it are the ones who are in charge of creating it and changing it, so that there's nothing really outside of our domain that we're going to be teaching. We actually created it, and that really helps us stick to the script. The number one goal of our as an instructor no one joke was the ability to stick to the script, because students need these foundations to develop as speakers. And where the informal part comes in, where the kind of social part comes in, is during the lunch and the break times, when students are going into the they're kind of talking about what they did the night before, what kind of movies they watched, which they learn how to say later in the program, but they're going to want to say it right away. You know, you're meeting new people, you want to talk about spaceships or what you saw on TV, I don't know. And that's kind of on a case-by-case basis that comes up. Very, very seldomly, as an instructor, will I bring up a word during class that is outside of the curriculum, no matter how interesting it is. We stick to the script during class, and during the breaks, during lunch, outside of class, is when we can use the language in other fashions. So it's kind of a combination of the two.
Now we have a question from, let me see the name, David, as a kind of response to Ian's question from earlier. Languages have revitalized well with official language status. Example, Irish, Maori, and Hebrew. Naturally, this is impossible on the federal or provincial level with the number of languages Canada has. But can this be of use on a regional level?
Somebody else can answer it. I'm just more focused on on this little community. That's all I'm focused on.
I'd say yes. And I think there's other people even who are watching who might have more expertise on this, who've worked in this, but I'd say yes, that seems to be more of a effective means for getting towards recognition and increasing the status of our unique Indigenous languages throughout Canada, is focusing more on regional language officialization. And we haven't seen that yet. And I think Canada approaches it slightly different than other places. Because when Canada really thinks about French and English, right, as their as a bilingual country, right? Those are their official languages. And when they look at those two languages, they look at the amount it costs to maintain those languages as primary languages throughout Canada. So when they see 60 or plus Indigenous languages, they look at that as a very large cost. They also look at it as having a translation for everything, right? So you want to buy some cereal at the grocery store. They think, well, how are you going to get 60 different languages written on that cereal box or on the sign, right? So that's often how they think. Now, maybe if it was regional, that'd be a little bit more, you know, a little bit easier, right? So you do know you do see areas where there are officializations. So in the States, for example, I know certain states like South Dakota, they have Lakota as an official language of the state. But what the difference there is that there's no money tied to that really. There's no support along with its officialization. So, you know, I think so. I don't know how it would manifest in reality. But also I mentioned that regardless of region, it appears that where the language is going to be used is more likely to be in our communities, meaning Mohawk communities, rather than non-native communities outside. Not to say that increasing awareness and, you know, understanding of our languages outside of our communities won't be of a benefit, but it appears that really where intergenerational transmission is going to be restored is in Mohawk communities themselves. And I think Mohawk communities can do maybe a better job at officializing their languages within their own communities. Because I would actually like to see if you go around every Mohawk community to say, hey, do you have a official or a language official language statement, you know, saying that Mohawk is our official language, and most communities probably would say no. So that's it. No, yeah.
Oh. Next question, I think, is for me. How did you pick Kanyen'kéha as a language you wanted to study, and how is your work going to affect our communities? Well, it was kind of by accident. I was reading up articles on linguistics to prepare for my interviews to get into my undergraduate program, and I, by accident, read an article about Kanyen'kéha and started getting really interested. And I bought a small textbook by Ghana Dawakon. Kanyen'kéha Dewadadi, I think it's on the audio forum. And I started learning that way. And then I did kind of my undergraduate dissertation and now my MA thesis on the language. And I went a couple of times to Six Nations, kind of like an internship to help out as best as I could. And I'm moving to Toronto next year to start a PhD, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to come more often to help as best as I can with my beginner level, maybe like more concretely. So I hope I can contribute to revitalization in my own small way, in that way. So yeah, that's it. Question by Mary Jones. Thank you for an absolutely wonderful presentation. Could you please tell us a bit more about how students respond to the teaching method that Rohahio outlined using word roots? Do your students find it daunting at first if they are not linguistically trained, or does the drilling you mentioned get around this problem?
At first, it's any sort of language, embarking on any sort of language journey is very daunting. Myself, I know prior to starting, I don't think Ryan did either. Wanadeka didn't. Prior to starting a program, I had zero linguistic background, and the linguistic portion that we use here isn't real linguistics. We kind of apply our own terms to things. We take what would be useful to us, and if it has a really long, complex name, we give it another name. Things such as that makes one of something, a numerative or something, we call it a oneifier, and so there's different labels that we put on that. It's a simplified version, but it is still technically linguistics, but it's not in the traditional sense. You need absolutely no background in linguistics in order to start the program or to be able to succeed in the program. What the root word method does is it really gives us a roadmap and building blocks and a blueprint really of how to go about learning the language. And in a way, it gives us direction and it gives us a foundation. So in many ways, it's pretty helpful. It's like learning power tools in a way. Once you start using a power tool, you're probably never going to go back to using hand tools. They're a bit louder, a bit trickier at first to get a hang of, but once you get rolling with it, then you'll never go back. Yeah.
Question from Julia. I am an online learner and belong to a small group that gets together once a week to practice. I am wondering who to contact about resources on drills, perhaps those used in the immersion program, that could assist us in maximizing our use of time together.
I'm happy that you do that, Julia. I would imagine, you know, like, I don't think there's anything formally written down for how to do a drill, or, you know, it's, I don't know. I think one, as I recall, in being a student, you know, I recall sitting there waiting for my turn and like counting down, like, okay, he's asking each one of the students, you know, like, Satsununika, huh? Wagatsununi, you know, like, okay, Satsununika Nize, oh, Wagatsununi. I'm like, okay, I know, I'm learning what I'm supposed to say, and by listening to everyone else. And so I think, you know, by having a drill leader in your group, you know, and having them have a goal to either go through conjugations and everyone gets a turn, you know, like, you know, you're starting with Wagatanuni or Satanuni, so everybody sort of knows what to expect and they're listening, actively listening the whole time. And then having a drill leader and switching up who gets to be the leader and what the goal is, I think that's a good strategy. But I don't know, Rohahil, do you have any other strategies or a method that they could use?
Yeah, the good part about our current situation is speakers are a dime a dozen right now. Young speakers coming from Mungwana Ganjokwa, you know, Six Nations, especially Ganawage, Akwazasne. And on Facebook, if you find anyone that, you know, or you're friends with someone, a teacher or not, if they're a speaker, absolutely, they can give you some guidance in it. I guess what you need is a plan and you need a speaker. And if you have those two things, you're in good shape. One of the big things that students try to learn right away is Quizlet, and they start answering questions. And if you look through Quizlet, there's all kinds of decks. Through YouTube, there's you know, some kind of lessons to follow along, especially a Yagwahwajira Daje language nest out in Ganawage. They put out all kinds of instructional videos. So in lieu of a speaker, I guess you could follow along with those videos, and always do it with at least another, you know, another learner or a group of people, because learning alone is just boring. And the more you keep it entertaining, the more you have fun with it, the more inclined you are to do it.
Yeah, we use Quizlet in the online program, and it's pretty helpful. I would recommend it. Another question from Ian. What would you say to a university which would like to develop a program to build toward fluency in the indigenous language, which we mentioned in our land acknowledgement, Ngwehongwe and Anishinaabe? Sorry, I'm not sure how to pronounce this one. Via a combination of regular courses plus a Middlebury-style summer intensive language school.
There's two things going there. One is sort of giving the job, or the university taking over the job of doing this, which some places might want to do. And the other is to have a university accredit what somebody like us is already doing. And we're headed in that direction, trying to get a university to accredit what we do. And there may be other things that would be required in order to meet their criteria for a university degree. And that's where we're headed, so that this job is not handed over to a university, but one that we would hope to be accredited.
I should just say we've reached the official end of the webinar, but of course, if people are willing to stay longer, that is absolutely fine. If you need to leave, that's fine. If you want to stay, that's also fine. We have many more questions from Rosemary. I believe when some of the languages were reduced to writing by Christian missionaries, a system of geometric shapes done through 360 degrees was used for syllables. As this now died out, did it apply to Mohawk? Are you referring to I think it was Cherokee they used that? With the, like syllable symbols? Or
In Cree, they use syllabics.
in Cree too. But I don't think they ever used that for Kanyen'kéha, right?
No.
Question from Cheryl. Have you considered establishing a language house? It is where people reside with other learners, along with a first language speaker, similar to the one mentioned by Gabriel Weiner in his book Fluent Forever, and many others have mentioned this as one possible means for quick language learning.
I think it's been considered for years. Hasn't happened yet in this community. It may have happened for short periods in other places, and a shortcut to that is the route that Ryan took when he finished our program, which is to leave our English-speaking community, leave an English-speaking environment, and move into a Mohawk-speaking environment, moving in with a speaker, a single speaker, and using that person as a way to expand and strengthen his own language. So that's the shortcut to doing it, but a full house and that I am not aware of one of those yet.
I'd also say likely the best examples of that are probably language nests. Oftentimes those are second language learners who have gone through adult immersion programs, not just our Ngowana program, but Radiwana Nirat and Gohnawage as well. And then they're creating that home environment specifically for the children, where it's not just about the child, right? It's a place for second language learners to have the opportunity to become better speakers themselves. And if you take that approach to language nests, it's going to be more effective rather than I'm going to drop my kids off at the nest and go do my thing, where we're realizing that the parents really need to be actively involved on a daily basis. And that's why also I'd say that we're developing a third-year program for Ngowana, is to work at honing in the skills of the language use and functions that students have outside of the classroom, and trying to get them to ensure that they have the capacity to speak in their homes. It'd be great to have a third-year program if we ever had the financial resources to make that happen.
Kind of leads us to our next question by Chris. The Ngowana Gajokwa program is very impressive and clearly took a lot of work to develop and takes a lot of work to maintain. Can you discuss some of the challenges you confronted, logistical, financial, etc., and how you overcame them?
When we started out, we didn't really know what we were doing. We were just making this stuff up as we went along. And so we made a lot of mistakes, analyzed the mistakes, and tried something different. And so we've just been doing this all by trial and error. And fortunately, we learned from all the mistakes we made, well, from most of them. And so that's how we got to where we're at today. So we have an established curriculum and established teaching methods. And so it's all it's all developed here. That's all we can say. There was no master plan to follow. There is no master plan for groups from people from other languages to follow, unfortunately. But I think the principles stay the same. Start with the smallest parts of the language that people can use, that is of common everyday language. Pick the simplest grammatical elements, and then just gradually add complexity, and do it all in a completely Ungohonwe language environment.
And we operate without any government funding. You know, we have no university infrastructure. We don't have a staff of thousands or hundreds or even a dozen or even, you know, more than the number of people you can count on one hand. You know, we got a message on the answering machine that said, this is a message for the office of the registrar. And like, we laughed for like 10 minutes. Like, we don't have these things, you know, so that's always a logistical challenge, and seeking funding year to year and not having the kind of stability that our kind of institution needs and deserves. You know, that's really a tough challenge to overcome every year, every funding cycle. And then in the online setting, you know, there's a human resource problem, you know, or like need that it's difficult to find somebody who has the language skills and the technical skills and the teaching ability. Like, it's a lot of skills in one person. So trying to figure out how to parse those different roles out to be able to have more people involved is like just a rethink, constantly rethinking and rebuilding. And I've rebuilt the online program, reinvented the wheel a number of times. And, you know, I'll use one resource and then that resource disappears. That whole website gets bought by somebody and then I have to start over. All the resources are gone that I've spent hundreds of hours building, you know, so it's always a technical challenge as well in the online setting.
Two questions from Derek. First, which communities in Canada have active revitalization efforts in place or planned? And is there any coordination with neighboring American communities?
I guess I'm happy to take a stab at that. Most communities don't have a plan, meaning a document that outlines the path forward to reach a certain goal within a certain amount of years, right? And what mechanisms they've outlined in order to reach that goal. Some communities have some plans, language revitalization plans that are 5 years long, 10 years long, 20 years long, and some are in development. The only communities that I know of that have something that's substantial is Kanyen'kéha, and I think Kanyen'kéha is developing one, and also Wata has a small one, and forgive me if I missed any. And those are critical steps, because one of the challenges with our adult immersion programming is that sometimes we don't know where it fits within a wider revitalization plan and how that it contributes to revitalization, or how it supports other mechanisms, whether they be top down or bottom up or what have you. So this would be extremely beneficial to Six Nations. Six Nations is a little bit more different, or a little more challenging, because there are technically 6 different languages here, well, 3 that are actually living, Mohawk, Onondaga, and Cayuga. So it makes it a bit more challenging to develop a language plan, a revitalization plan. And are we working together amongst our communities? I'd say we'd probably get a low mark on a scorecard for that, right? And we could do a better job at working together in revitalizing Kanyen'kéha as a whole. There might be some challenges. Dialect is one that people mention, which I think is much smaller of an issue than people really seem to realize. They seem to be bigger, those changes or differences in dialect when you're beginning or when you know little of the language. And when you become pretty proficient, you start to realize that they're quite minor, you know, lexical differences and some minor pronunciation differences, but that's pretty well that. I hope I answered your question okay.
Then second question from Derek. I've read that Mohawk is a very descriptive language. Thinking of the model of language building, is there some coordinated effort or an agreed authority to tackle neologisms and perhaps disseminate them via an online glossary? He gives examples from Icelandic.
Yeah,
can you repeat the question? You cut out and I'm trying to find it in the
Oh,
chat.
sorry. Yeah, basically,
Yes.
it's asking about is there like a coordinated authority about how to create new words in Mohawk?
Oh, right. Yeah. So we've noticed that some revitalization strategies from indigenous people throughout the world, they have those things. For example, they've got a really famous one. It's been minimally attempted amongst Kanyen'kéha as for the language as a whole, for obvious reasons that there does exist dialects, and we've kind of come down to the decision that it's up to individual communities to work at that, not as for Kanyen'kéha as a whole. But really it also kind of comes to the point that it's not at the top of our list, I don't think. The lack of words, words for microwave and podcasts and these kind of things. We can easily code switch, but oftentimes our language offers features for us to easily create words to describe what we need to describe. So, when there's no word, it's not like we need somebody to tell us what it is. It's pretty, relatively easy to create that on your own. And then what happens is communities, depending on which community it is, they'll describe it slightly different, and that's fine. But I don't think even if we did have one, it would make a large difference for revitalization as I've described in my presentation. Not to say it wouldn't be effective in some way, but I don't think it's at the top of our list.
So I guess that's kind of related to dialectal variation, like the dialects in the East in Ghana, they have some words from French, etc. that you don't have in Six Nations. I guess that's kind of related to that too.
Yeah.
Question from David. My question is mostly for Ryan, but all can answer if they like. We see lots of interest in learning languages from students in university programs, like what you mentioned for French, German, or people learning Japanese and Korean because of their influence on music and entertainment. What are your thoughts on the use and viability of a popularization in media to attract more learners?
Since you pointed to me, David, I'll try it. I think yes. These kind of things will definitely help. Especially when you're trying to recreate first language speaking children, when they're we've noticed around the world where the biggest challenge is when young children become adolescents or preteens, is that they start to struggle with understanding why the language is even relevant to their lives. Right? When they're children, it doesn't matter. Like they don't have to care. Right? Nobody cares about the language they're learning as a child. They just want to play with their friends. But later, when they become 12, 13, 14 years old, and they realize the whole world's English and there's nothing relevant to their lives available in their language, and all their friends speak English, they don't really feel like it's interesting anymore. So things like, having translations of whatever, Bambi and Mulan and, Marvel movies and those kind of things would definitely help. And, it might make those outside of our communities more interested and understand that they're still alive, and increase the creation of good neighbors amongst our communities to help us in this revitalization effort of our language. I think those would be big things. And I think our graduates and second language learners in the future would be perfectly able to tackle some of those projects. That's it. So I'm not sure if anybody else wanted to answer that. Yeah. Maybe Zoe knows more about that kind of thing than me.
Yeah, I think the creation of popular media, music, movies, TV shows and whatnot that are in our language, for me, it's not to attract more language learners to our programs, because I feel like we kind of are operating at capacity all the time. But I'd be miserable if I had 500 students trying to take my program at once. I just can't do it. But if we had 500 people watching a show that's all in our language, that's really meaningful, because this is a popular meme or term or phrase in popular culture right now, is that representation matters, and that we see such a dearth of programming that exists in our language, and people are so hungry for it. Like if the more that we see it, the more that broadcasters and public funders of programming learn that like it's a viable thing to fund things that are in our languages, because people want to hear it, people want to see it, even if they don't speak it themselves. It's enjoyable to experience something in another language. You know, we watch Asian films, we watch, you know, films from other countries all the time. Why not seeing more of that of our own language? A tiny little short that we made, Kanyen'kéha, it was a silly little thing to just have something for entertainment purposes, and to make people laugh, was like a 4-minute version of the original Star Wars film, and I purposefully made that with no subtitles so that people could see the pictures. And I think Star Wars is iconic enough that even if you don't know what we're saying, you understand like, oh, that's Princess Leia, even if you haven't seen Star Wars, you kind of know enough about it from just it being so in the popular media that you know a little bit about what's happening. So it wasn't important to me to give people something to read along with, but for people to hear our language and understand that we are living in it and enjoying it and laughing together and being able to create something. And that's more meaningful to me than a lot of things. And it became so popular, it like ended up on the national news, and it went to little film festivals around the world, and it was really an unintentional effect. But it just goes to show that there's a real need for more popular media in our language.
For those of you who play video games, another area where the Mohawk language was featured is the Assassin's Creed games, right? I think some speakers from Kahnawake worked as language consultants for that.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And I'd like to add in too there, Tito, you know, as far as media, in the media, or making cool things in the language, I guess is what we're discussing. I mean, it's a good thing to attract new learners, but right now, supporting students who are speakers who have become speakers, who put in the work, those have already become speakers. That's really a demographic we have to address. And higher level media right now is really the support that they need, that we all need right now. And right now I have a cohort of second-year students that are going to graduate this coming Friday. And they're all asking me, well, what now? I graduate and go on to Ganjoko. I'm done with a 2-year immersion program. Unless they get a teaching position or they start raising a family, their partner in the language, it's going to be difficult for language maintenance. So that's one way that it would support those who have already gone through the process of becoming speakers.
Very interesting. I think that leads us to our next question, actually, by Ian. Are there immersion grads who have decided to raise their children as first language speakers of Mohawk? I can mention the policy in Wales called TWF, which offers language courses for expectant parents.
Yeah, that's one thing that we recognize the need to, that if the language is going to survive, we must depend on intergenerational transmission. And that really is probably one of the hardest thing to do, and sort of bringing all the pieces together, where we get a man and a woman or partners who have competence in the language and a commitment to raise their children speaking the language. And it's the hardest thing to do because we don't always get matched up with partners like that. And so it is really, we're fortunate that we have a few people who are graduates of the program that have gone on to do that. They're very few, but it shows that it can be done. And it is a very fragile link I suppose we have in sort of trying to reestablish this chain of first language speakers. Possible, but we still have a long way to go.
Going back to what Rohahio was saying about, how to maintain the language once you leave the immersion program. Ian has another question. What in general are the grads of your program doing now with their language? Do they manage to keep it up, to develop it further, and not to backslide?
I'd say that yeah, there are a lot of black backsliders, people who stop using it, and then there are a number of people who have gone on and considerably increased their proficiency in the language. And I think it certainly helps to have a job in which you can use the language during your workday as a way of maintaining and strengthening the language. But people have gone on to increase their proficiency with no job out of sheer determination. And I really applaud those people that have done that and have become real models for students and the community as a whole.
What is the contrast between the initial inspiration or goal of your students and their broader, more expansive goal that they develop as they progress through your program? How does their goal change, I guess?
I believe it's speaking to the kind of motivating factors, or how one's individual students' goals change throughout the progression of the program. Almost everyone that comes in, they say, well, I want to be conversational. And they reach that goal within the first 3 weeks. This is how you do a conversation. This is what you do. So that goal changes very quickly. Some say they want to teach right away. And then they say, oh, that sucks. I don't want to do that. Look at my teacher. And look what it's doing to him. And they don't want to do that anymore. So motivating factors that take them in there, they want to start their family. They want to work in the language in some capacity. Those goals kind of, if they're strong enough, they keep them going throughout the entire program. What happens in the second year is it's not as exciting, I guess, because nothing's brand new anymore, and it's evolving on what foundations are already there. So that presents a new challenge in the second year, and that's really on the second year instructor to keep it entertaining and keep coming up with new things and keep students engaged to get them through the year. So that's certainly that's a change that occurs.
Another question from Mary Jones. Is there regional variation within Mohawk? And if so, is this an obstacle to learners?
Yes, there is variation. We, kind of have come to a consensus that there's 3 main dialects, which is called in the literature anyways, Eastern, Central, and Western. So mainly 3, but what we also notice even within those dialects that each community is slightly different, and there are family dialects and idiolects all mixed into that. So there's a lot of variation. And one challenge that it has created is sharing of resources between immersion schools that exist in different communities. So, there might be a challenge with, say, an immersion school using material, or immersion school in Six Nations using material from an immersion school in Kahnawake, where, a couple of challenges will be lexical, also orthography, slightly different orthography, but then also cultural. The experience might be slightly different. The students, their experience in Six Nations versus Kahnawake, because they are, quite a ways apart. How far is the drive? 7 hours or something like that. So it is slightly different culturally. those are major issues, the main issues I can think of, but I think those are tiny issues from my personal opinion. I really, the languages they're completely intelligible, that doesn't matter which dialect you speak, for the most part anyways. So yeah, that's my answer. Thank you.
No, I think sadly we're going to have to wrap up. I'm sorry for any questions that were left unanswered. I hope you can still try and contact us for the further questions. Thanks everyone for joining us today, and I hope that you learned some interesting things today. And thanks to Nyawangoa, to our panelists, for their interesting insights and all their great work revitalizing their language. It was really great to see.
What's going on with these, Martin?
Yeah.
Nyawa.
Martin.
Nyawangoa. Bye everyone.
Mga
Yes.